Hello, we're playing against Khalifa, who is rated 1741, and we're going to start the game with e4. Let's see where this takes us. So he chooses a Sicilian defense with the move c5. Well, I've played several Sicilian games on the channel, Sicilians with knight f3, Sicilians with c3, always with the aim of pushing d4. All right, let's play knight f3 and then we'll see which variation he chooses for black, because an opening is chosen by both sides. So he just played d6. So the main idea behind d6 isn't necessarily to develop the bishop to g4, although that can be useful, of course, but it's mainly to control the e5 square so that black can then follow up with knight f6, which will attack the central pawn on e4. Because if he had started with knight f6, his knight would have been destabilized by the push of the pawn to e5, which would have attacked his knight. So d6 is to control the e5 square. So we can play d4. We can also play moves like fb5 check. We're going to play d4. We're going to play classic. Usually black captures to prevent the d-pawn from taking or even advancing into enemy territory. We can recapture with the knight or with the queen. Recapturing with the knight is usually the standard move, but with the queen is also possible. Because if black plays king and the c6 with the intention of chasing the queen, there's the move bishop b5, which comes to pin. So that's a variation that exists. We can play queen takes d4. Well, actually, I'm going to play it. Queen takes d4. So here, usually black plays knight c6 and bishop b5 arrives, and black unpins with bishop d7. Well, let's see if that's what my opponent is going to play. So the advantage of having the queen on d4 is that it protects the pawn on e4. And so if black plays knight f6, I don't have to defend the e4 pawn. It's already defended, so I can insert the move c4. Because if I had recaptured with the knight, and if black had played knight f6, I would probably have been forced to play knight c3 to defend my pawn on e4. But now, after a move like knight f6, I can play c4, and only then play knight c3 afterwards. And when you have pawns on c4 and e4, this pawn structure is called the Maróczy Bind. It was the player Maroczy who theorized this pawn structure with the idea of clamping down on the d5 square, having very strong control over the d5 square, and thus hindering the freeing move from d6 to d5. You see, if we have pawns on c4 and e4, we are playing one rank further up than our opponent, so we have a space advantage. So if my opponent plays knight to c6, I play bishop to b5, the pin, and if there are moves like knight to f6, I play c4 before playing knight to c3 to build the pawn structure known as the Maróczy Bind. So my opponent takes his time. It's important to know that Maroczy actually faced these structures with black, and an amateur player had played this structure against him with the pawns on e4 and c4. He had a lot of trouble winning the game. And that's why he became interested in these structures from the white side, and afterwards he adopted it himself. All right, my opponent plays queen to c7. Well, I think I'm going to play c4. We're going to create the Maróczy Bind. This will be an opportunity to work on this pawn structure for the channel, because I don't think I've played a pawn structure with the Maróczy Bind yet in the instructional games. So now after king to d6, I can't pin anymore though. I can't play phobe 5 anymore since the c4 pawn is there. So I'll have to retreat the queen. That's the problem, it's finding a good square. It's not so obvious because on d3, she'll get in the bishop's way. On d2, it's the other bishop that could be blocked. It's not easy to find the right square here. So I could go back to d1, but I'm not sure. All right, I'll go back to d1, and my opponent plays e6. So e6, obviously, it controls the d5 square and can sometimes support the d5 push. But for now, the d5 square is really under control. So I'm going to play the move knight to d3, which seems natural. As you can see, I can't go to the outpost on d5 because the e6 pawn guarantees the protection of the d5 square. So he plays h6. Why does he play h6? Because black may have the idea sooner or later to push b5. Right now it's not possible. It's under white's control. The pawn, the knight, and the bishop are controlling it. But sometimes this b5 push is still possible, especially when there's a rook on b8 or when there are bishops on d7. If the knight moves, the bishop can support the b5 push. So if b5 happens, it will destroy c4, and then it will be much easier to follow up with d5. My goal in this type of structure is to control the b5 and d5 breakthroughs. Because if my opponent can't play the b5 and d5 breakthroughs, what does he have left? He still has f5, but that's quite weakening for the defenses of his black king, since it's a pawn that's close to the king. And the e5 push gives up the d5 square, and the a5 push gives up the b5 square. So if he's not able to play b5 and d5, in reality he won't have any other interesting pawn moves, and he'll have to suffer from a lack of space since white is playing on an extra rank here. So I really have to keep a close eye on the d5 and b5 pushes. For now it seems under control, so I'm going to develop my pieces. So obviously there are a lot of possible developing moves like f2 or f3. I don't really want to play f3 because it interferes with my queen's control of the d file. So I'll simply play bishop e2 and open the way for a kingside castling. That will put my king in safety, and at the same time the rook will be able to join the fight. My opponent will probably play bishop e7 and do the same, do kingside castling. Well, so how am I actually going to play it right now? Well, maybe try to play b3 with bishop b2 or bishop a3, because the bishop still needs to be developed. Let's play b3. There, he did kingside castling. So bishop a3 is possible, but moves like queen a5 could be a bit annoying. We can also play a4 to really control the b5 square, and then allow bishop a3 without fearing the move queen a5, since the bishop won't be attacked, only the knight will be attacked, but we can defend it. Now maybe I don't want to play a4 too quickly, because a4 does give up the b4 square to the opponent's knight after all. You might say if I play a4 and bishop a3, I'll control the b4 square with the bishop. But I would actually prefer an approach with bishop b2. The idea behind developing the bishop is to free up the c1 square. If I put a rook on c1, I'll create a direct confrontation between the rook and the queen. Tactically, that's very dangerous for the opponent. For example, if I have the rook on c1, I could look for moves like knight to d5. If the pawn is taken, I can recapture with the pawn and attack his knight, which will be pinned thanks to the direct confrontation with the rook and queen. I'm going to play rook to c1 and start threatening moves like knight to d5. He just played bishop to b7. So now I need to calculate knight to d5. Knight d5, he'll be forced to take because the knight is very strong. It attacks the queen, it attacks the pawn, it attacks the bishop, it attacks the knight, so it is too radiant. So on king d5, we will have pawn takes. So pawn takes, and I attack his knight. Now, what bothers me is that he will be able to take the pawn on e4. Yes, but I take his knight on c6. And if the bishop recaptures, maybe a move like queen c2 to attack the bishop twice and to attack his knight. But the knight could come back to c5. But I could play before 2 to chase his knight from c5 and then take his bishop on c6. So you see on knight d5, pawn takes, pawn takes. If he takes the pawn on e4, I take the knight on c6 and attack his bishop. And if he takes queen c2, I attack his knight and I attack his bishop on the file. So he might want to block my attack on the file by playing king dc5. But as I said, b4 will chase his knight away. That seems interesting to me. So we're going to play king d5. Here the knight is very hard to tolerate. You see, it's putting a lot of pressure on the opposite corner. There we go. So he takes, I take back. So the pin, the rook-queen alignment, will ensure I recover my piece. And I hope to recover it under good conditions. Because when I take the knight, I'll also open the file to attack the d6 pawn, which will be an isolated pawn. That is, a pawn that doesn't have the protection of other pawns. Of course, it will have the protection of pieces, but precisely the pieces will have a defensive duty, and so that will limit and hinder their attacking possibilities, since they'll have to defend a pawn. That ultimately makes the opponent's pieces passive. So here, my opponent has an extra piece, but I will get the knight back, so we'll end up with material equality again. On knight takes e4, as I was saying, I was considering pawn takes knight, bishop takes, and then queen to c2 to attack the knight and the bishop twice. The bishop is pinned because the queen is behind it. So he takes on e4, so we'll take on c6 as we had planned. Now, if he doesn't want to play bishop takes c6, he'll have to play bishop to c8, but that would be pretty passive for him. There you go. So this was the line we had anticipated, and queen to c2 is coming. So here, the idea is that I'm threatening both queen takes bishop and also queen takes knight, because if bishop takes, I grab the queen afterwards and win back a piece in the process. So he plays rook to c8, and now if I play queen takes knight, bishop takes, I take his queen, but he recaptures and I would have lost material there, so that's not interesting. So here I'm considering knight to d4. That's not bad. Knight to d4. I'm going to attack his bishop for a third time. And the bishop can't move because then I'd be attacking the queen twice, which was only protected once. So knight d4 looks like it wins material. All right, let's play knight d4. So my opponent is up a pawn, but he mainly has problems with his position. I'm attacking the bishop 3 times. And behind that, the queen is under attack. The knight is also being targeted. I could play moves like bishop to f3 to attack the knight, the bishop, and even the rook that's lined up. So I really doubt he can actually recover from this attack. So what could he do? Maybe bishop f6 with the idea that when I take his bishop, he could try to take mine to deflect my queen. But then I recapture with the queen, and so he won't be able to take my knight. Otherwise, he'll lose his queen. Maybe he can try something else. On bishop f6, knight takes, he takes my queen, I recapture, he takes, I recapture, and he takes my bishop. But I would still have won the exchange in the process. That is the advantage of a rook over a bishop. So now my opponent is thinking, I'll speed up this sequence in editing to go straight to the move played. There we go. He just played bishop to g5. So he's attacking the rook. There are several different candidate moves here. Already f4 is one such candidate move. The rook is defending, so if I play f4, I am attacking his bishop, and his problems on the board still remain. The threats continue for my opponent. I'm also calculating the capture. Queen takes bishop. He takes my rook. I recapture. I still have an extra piece. I think f4 is the simplest. He ends up with more and more pieces under attack. The bishop is attacked. The other bishop is attacked 3 times. Soon, bishop f3 can arrive with attacks on the long diagonal. There, he will play bishop f6 to try to counterattack the bishop b2 when I go to capture the bishop in c6. Afterwards, on bishop f6, I don't have to take the bishop on c6 right away. On bishop f6, I can also consider bishop f3. But she might play d5. Most likely, actually. There you go. He plays f6. So let's calculate the captures on c6. I'll start by calculating the captures with the queen. On queen takes c6, he will take back. I can recapture with the rook. And then he'll play bishop takes knight as an intermediate move. I could take his rook with check. Oh no, because he takes my knight with check. That's his idea. So I can't leave the knight there, in fact, because it will be taken on check. So I have to do color princesses. Then on bishop takes b2, queen takes, and the rook defends the knight. So on knight takes c6, that seems like the right move to me. There we go. Now, I'm also threatening queen takes knight. So this is quite a tactical game this time. On the channel, I often play positional games based on pawn structures, on differences between bishops and knights, but here it's really all about combinations. So he just took my bishop, so I take back. And the rook defends the knight, so he can't recapture. And he's down a piece. There will always be moves like bishop to f3 coming up. I think play along the diagonal is interesting. I don't have any interesting discovered check. You might think that if the knight moves, I grab the queen. And for example, I'll play knight to a7 check, but actually it's the queen that will come and take my knight. I don't know how to take advantage of the alignment between the rook and queen for now. But now the job is done. I'm up a piece, so I just need to keep things safe. We exchange the opponent's active pieces, and little by little we get closer to an endgame. So he just moved his queen away. Now he's threatening rook takes knight. All right, I'm going to offer piece exchanges. By moving my knight, I'll offer to exchange rooks. I just need to decide where to move my knight. I think I'll go to b4. That way afterwards the knight can go to d5, and that would be a great square for my knight. So knight to b4, unless he plays d5 himself. Plus I'm attacking the a6 pawn twice here. So the rooks are up for exchange. He just played to 5. Let's place the knight on d5. That's a great square, and it threatens k and takes b6 with some serious forks. We'll be attacking both rooks and the queen. So he just played queen e6. He's attacking my knight here. I can play k takes b6, win a pawn. I wouldn't win the quality with the fork because he can trade the rooks and then save this one. But kd takes, it's still a candidate move, of course. We can also look at other moves, maybe also bishop c4. The bishop comes to defend the knight, and that creates a dangerous alignment for the queen. Knight to c7 isn't bad. Knight to c7 will attack the queen and the rook. That will create a fork. So let's play knight to c7. Of course, he can take the knight, but I take back, and I will have won the exchange. I already have an extra piece, and the exchange means having a rook over a knight, so I would have a full rook up since I had already won a piece. He just played queen h6. What is he threatening? Nothing. He simply saved his queen in reality. Well, I'll take the rook. He takes back, but the move bishop f3 is not going to be pleasant for him. If I play bishop f3, he can play queen takes pawn because my rook will no longer be defending. Here, he could have problems with a back rank mate. You see, the rook is the only defender of the 8th rank, the last rank. So I'm also interested in moves like queen c2. I'm attacking his knight and threatening queen c8. Rook takes and rook takes, checkmate, back rank mate. The problem with queen c2 is that he can only play knight e5 and block my action on the file. So that's a bit unfortunate. And I can't manage to destabilize the knight, really. Queen c2, knight to c5. I could try playing a 3 and b4, but he'll have time to solve his problems. It's a bit slow. I don't have much time left, so I'm going to play a bit faster. Still, I'm going to play queen c2. After all, if I play knight d6-5, the knight retreats, and he'll be a bit less dangerous. There, he just put his rook there. So here, it's easy. You just have to take the knight to deflect the rook and play rook to c8, and that will lead to mate. The rook comes back, we take, and it's mate. So queen takes knight. That's the theme of overloading. That is, the rook is overloaded, having to defend both the 8th rank and the knight. So now he can't take back. That's why he just moved his rook to avoid getting checkmated. All right, so let's try to get a bit more active. Rook c7. The white rook moves to the 7th on g. Queen f6. So what is he aiming for with queen f6? I'm not really sure, but I know that exchanging queens is rather favorable for me. But okay, I don't have much time, so I'll play bishop to d3. And I'm looking for mates on h. I know he can play g6 to block that, but it's just to give him the move and stop my clock from running. There, he just played g6. So now I play h3 just to give my king a little escape square. Because as soon as my queen moves, the problem is that there's a move like queen to d4 check. You see, I wanted to play queen to e7 at some point, but queen to d4 gives check, a fork on my bishop. So I'd rather give my king a little square and look for some shelter for him. Maybe king to h1 or king to h2, so he's a bit better hidden actually. Here, what I can also do is bishop to c4 to put pressure on the pawn at f7. And maybe queen to e7 afterwards. I'm playing bishop to c4. Now his rook can't move, or there's rook takes f7, making the king-queen fork. She just played h5, queen e7. I propose to exchange queens, and I increase the pressure on f7. Now if I play queen to d4 check, my king moves, no problem. So he exchanged queens, but well, there is an extra rook for white, so the endgame is hopeless. I guess he's continuing to play because he sees I'm not doing very well on time. So here I connect the rooks on the file. I don't see a quick mate. We're going to try to play g4 so that the pawns control all the squares in front of the king and he can't get active. There, g4. And we're going to try to confine black within this small area here. Since the rook on f8 can't move because of the pressure on f7, we're going to try little by little to build a prison around the black king. Definitely play g5 again to take away more squares from the king. There are, of course, a wide variety of ways to win in this position now, in this situation, but you have to pick one. So he just played the move g5, and although I could take, I'm honestly not even interested in taking at all. I'd rather play f5, controlling new squares in his position. Notice that I can play rook e6, he can't take because of the pin. When I play rook to e6, I'm attacking the pawn, but I'm also threatening rook to g6 check. He still can't take, again, because of the pin. So it could be rook e6, rook g6 check, and then take the pawn on g5. The problem is that now he's going to be in Zugzwang, meaning he'll be out of moves. It's a German term that means no moves. And it's true that as soon as a pawn moves forward, he loses the pawn. The f-pawn can't advance because it's pinned. If the rook moves, he loses f7. The king doesn't have many squares either. So now he's out of any moves. Every move he plays just worsens his position. If I play king to g8, I can play f6 and control the g7 square. I deprive his king of the king g7. Well, now he has less than a minute left. Maybe he'll just let himself lose now, since it's unpleasant to find yourself out of moves. Actually, if I play moves like b5, I don't even waste time taking his pawn. After b5, I come to d5 and keep the pressure on f7. Because the move b5, it doesn't really lead anywhere. There, he just played king there. Well, I'm going to improve my king's position. In the endgame, you can improve your king's position. He comes here, and now I play rook to a6 as planned, depriving him of squares on the 6th rank, and the pawn cannot take because of the pin. I'm attacking d6, but that's just incidental. I'm trying to build a prison around his king, so I can play rook to g6 check. The pawn can't take because of the pin now. And then I capture the pawn on g5. So I might have ideas like playing rook to e3 and then rook to h3 mate afterwards, or rook e1 and rook h1 mate. There you go. He resigns, but those were the ideas. Now, the goal was to transfer the rook from e7 to the h file, since the rook is controlling the g file. Well, I hope you found this video interesting. Note that you can't even play f6, because there would be rook h5 checkmate. The rook attacks, the other rook is trapped, and the bishop would control the e8 square, so he has no more moves. So as you can see, in this Sicilian opening after e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4 takes. So here I recaptured with the queen. The idea is that if black plays knight c6, I am able to pin. If bishop d7 is played, I can simply retreat my queen. I can also take his knight. And now after a move like knight f6, since the queen defends e4, I don't need to play knight c3. I can insert the move c4 and create the Maróczy Bind, that is the two pawns that clamp down and control the d5 square. Now in the actual game, it didn't go exactly like that because he played queen c7 and I decided to play c4 and create this bind. Knight c6, queen retreated, e6, knight c3, a6, bishop e2, knight f6, kingside castling, bishop e7, b3, kingside castling, bishop b2, b6, rook c1. And here the idea is to line up the rook and queen, and as you saw in the game, the plan is to play knight to d5 afterwards and take advantage of this alignment. Now you might think these alignments aren't very dangerous, since there are plenty of pieces between the rook and the queen, but you always have to be very careful with this, because the pieces and pawns can easily disappear at some point, sometimes by force. And as you can see, after bishop b7 there was the move knight d5. Here the knight on d5 is hard to tolerate. In reality, you can probably tolerate it. You can retreat the queen to d8, but afterwards I could also have taken the bishop on e7, a bishop that's important for defending d6 and f6 because the pawn on d6 is under attack. So I think that after queen to d8, I could have taken the bishop on e7, and that seemed interesting to me. But after pawn takes, so we had this capture on d5, which ensures the recovery of the knight in very good conditions. So that's a theme to know. I hope you found this video interesting. We'll see you soon for new adventures. You can leave me thumbs up or comments to help me. Goodbye. Have a good end of the day.